The glass doors of St. Mary's Hospital in New York swung open with a rush of cold night air. Keanu Reeves half ran, half carried his wife through the entrance, his arm wrapped tightly around her trembling shoulders. Her face was pale, almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent lights, her breaths shallow and uneven. The city outside was still alive with noise horns blaring, sirens echoing, but inside the hospital, it was another world, sterile, tense, filled with the quiet hum of machines and murmured urgency. "Help! Please, someone help her!" Keanu's voice cracked, echoing down the hall. A nurse looked up from the front desk, startled. "Sir, calm down. What's the problem?" She collapsed, Keanu stammered, his hand tightening around his wife's. She said she couldn't breathe then. She just went limp. Within seconds, a gurney was wheeled forward. Two nurses guided his wife onto it, attaching tubes and checking vitals. Keanu tried to follow as they pushed her toward the emergency bay, but a hand stopped him. "Sir, wait here," said the receptionist flatly, not even looking up from her computer. "We'll let you know once the doctors have seen her." Keanu stood frozen for a moment, his chest heaving. He wanted to argue, to explain that he couldn't let go, but something in her tone made him stop. He looked around the waiting room, a row of exhausted faces, the smell of antiseptic, the buzz of flickering lights. Everyone seemed trapped in their own quiet storm. He sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair. For once, the man who had faced explosions, assassins, and impossible odds on screen felt utterly powerless. All his fame, all his money, none of it mattered now. He was just another husband praying for a miracle. From behind the counter, the receptionist whispered to a colleague, glancing at him briefly. "He looks familiar," one said. "Probably just another broke New Yorker," the other replied with a shrug. "They all do when they're desperate." Keanu's gaze drifted toward the glass doors of the emergency room. Every few seconds, nurses hurried past with clipboards and IV stands, their shoes squeaking on the polished floor. His heart pounded in rhythm with the beeping monitors. He remembered the first time he saw his wife faint, years ago, during a film shoot in Paris. She had laughed it off back then, saying she was just tired. But tonight, the fear in her eyes was different. It wasn't exhaustion, it was pain. Real pain. Minutes felt like hours. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly. Keanu clasped his hands together, head bowed, whispering words no one could hear. "Just hold on," he murmured. "Please don't leave me." The automatic doors to the ER opened again, and a young doctor stepped out, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. "Mr. Reeves," she called. He stood instantly, hope and dread twisting together inside him. That was the moment the night truly began to change. The swinging doors to the emergency bay burst open with a hiss, and a young female doctor strode toward Keanu. Her white coat fluttered behind her, stethoscope glinting under the harsh lights. Her steps were brisk, her expression unreadable, but there was something sharp in her eyes, the kind of coldness born not of cruelty, but exhaustion. She'd seen too many frantic families, too many pleading faces. To her, this was just another long night. "Sir, please stay outside," she said, voice clipped, efficient. "We'll take care of her." Keanu nodded quickly, his voice soft, pleading. "Please, can I just stay by her side? She gets nervous without me." His tone was calm, almost too calm for the panic burning inside him. The doctor sighed, glancing briefly at him before looking back to her clipboard. "We don't allow strangers inside the emergency bay. Don't make a scene." Her words struck him like a slap. Stranger. He wanted to explain that he was her husband, that the woman behind those glass doors was his entire world. But before he could speak, the doctor lifted her chin with the kind of authority that silences even the brave. "Sir, please, we're trying to work here. You'll just be in the way." Keanu swallowed, the lump in his throat tightening. "I understand. She cut him off again, this time her tone edged with irritation. "Look, you need to wait. You look like you haven't even paid for insurance. Let us handle it. Just sit down and don't cause any problems, all right?" The words hung in the air like frost. Around them, a nurse hesitated mid-step, glancing nervously at the doctor. A man reading a newspaper nearby looked up. The room fell awkwardly quiet. Keanu froze. For a moment, he didn't even seem to breathe. His eyes, dark and weary, searched hers, not with anger but disbelief. He could see the arrogance, the impatience, and beneath it, a complete lack of empathy. I'm not here to cause trouble, he murmured. I just want to make sure she's okay. But the doctor had already turned away. Security, she called over her shoulder to a nurse. Make sure he stays outside. Keanu stood there motionless, the noise of the hospital fading into a dull hum. He wasn't used to being recognized everywhere. He lived quietly, avoided publicity, dressed simply. But in this moment, his humility became a disguise. To her, he wasn't Keanu Reeves, the beloved actor. He was just another worried man in an old jacket, pacing the hospital floor. He lowered his eyes, his voice barely a whisper. "All right," he said. "I'll wait." Then slowly, he walked back toward the row of plastic chairs in the waiting room, each step heavier than the last. He sat down, his hands trembling slightly, staring at the door where his wife had vanished. And somewhere behind the glass, the doctor who had just dismissed him didn't realize she had spoken to a man who had spent his life showing kindness to strangers, even when the world didn't return it. Minutes dragged by like hours. Keanu stood near the doorway, unable to sit still, his eyes fixed on the small rectangular window of the emergency bay. Through the glass, he could see glimpses of movement, doctors, nurses, the soft flash of monitors, but not her. Not the woman who was his entire world. Every few seconds, his hands clenched and unclenched. He wanted to believe she was fine, that they were helping her. But the unknown gnawed at him. Finally, his worry overpowered his restraint. He took a step closer to the door. "Doctor," he called gently, "please, I just need to know how she's doing. Has anyone checked her pulse rate? She has a heart—" Before he could finish, the same young doctor appeared again, her expression impatient, jaw tight, her voice sliced through the air like cold metal. "Sir, enough," she snapped. "You're not helping. We have real patients with real problems. Go sit down or leave. You're not the only one here, poor man." The words echoed down the hall. Poor man. It was a sentence sharp enough to wound anyone, but to Keanu, it wasn't anger that filled him. It was disbelief. The waiting room fell completely silent. A mother holding her child stopped mid-rocking. The receptionist froze, her fingers suspended over the keyboard. Even the low murmur of machines seemed to hush. For a moment, nobody moved. A nurse standing nearby gasped softly, her eyes widening as recognition dawned. She had seen that face before, maybe on a movie poster, maybe in an interview where he spoke about kindness and loss. Her lips parted, but she didn't dare speak. Keanu stood perfectly still. His shoulders rose and fell slowly as he took a breath. His gaze met the doctor's, but there was no fury in his eyes, no pride, no ego, just quiet disappointment, the kind that says more than words ever could. He could have revealed himself right there. He could have said his name, reminded her who he was, the man whose movies filled theaters, whose kindness filled hearts. But he didn't. That wasn't who he was. Instead, he nodded once. "All right," he said softly, voice steady despite the tremor in it. "I understand." He turned away, the fluorescent light casting a faint glow on his tired face. Each step back toward the waiting area felt heavier than the last. He sank into a corner chair, elbows resting on his knees, eyes distant. Around him, whispers began. "Was that—" someone murmured. "It looked like—" The nurse quietly shushed them, her gaze lingering on Keanu's bowed head. He sat there in silence, his fingers interlocked, staring at the sterile white floor. Inside, his heart raced, not from anger but from fear for the woman behind those doors. And though the doctor had walked away, the sting of her words lingered in the air like a bitter echo. Not because she'd insulted a celebrity, but because she'd forgotten something far simpler, that behind every worried face, rich or poor, there is love. The quiet hum of the waiting room was broken by the sharp echo of hurried footsteps. The glass doors at the far end of the corridor slid open, and a tall man in a dark suit rushed in, his hospital badge swinging wildly from his neck. His face was pale, his voice breathless with urgency. "Where is he?" he demanded, scanning the room. "Mr. Reeves, Keanu Reeves, is in our ER." Heads turned instantly. The receptionist's jaw fell open. The nurse who had recognized him earlier dropped her clipboard, the sound echoing across the floor. The doctor, the same one who had dismissed him minutes ago, stood frozen, her fingers tightening around the chart she held. The hospital director spotted Keanu sitting quietly in the corner, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes distant. Relief and panic washed over the director's face all at once. He hurried toward him. "Mr. Reeves," he said, voice trembling. "We are so sorry. We had no idea you were here. If I'd known—" Keanu blinked, surprised by the commotion. "Please," he said softly, "just take care of my wife. That's all that matters." But the director's voice carried through the entire waiting room, and with every word, more heads turned. A whisper rippled through the nurses, the patients, even the janitor mopping the far corner. "Did he say Keanu Reeves? The actor? Oh my God!" The doctor's heart dropped into her stomach. Her clipboard slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a hollow thud. The papers scattered, white sheets fluttering like guilty confessions. She turned slowly, her pulse racing, eyes widening as she truly saw him for the first time. The same man she'd just scolded, dismissed, and humiliated, sitting there quietly, showing no anger, no arrogance. "Reeves," she whispered. "Keanu Reeves?" Her voice cracked on the second word. Her mind raced through the last few minutes, the tone she'd used, the things she'd said, the contempt in her own voice. Poor man. The words now echoed in her head like a curse. The entire staff seemed to freeze in time. Nurses exchanged nervous glances. The receptionist stared at her monitor, pretending to type, but hitting the wrong keys again and again. Even the beeping machines down the hallway seemed to falter, as if the hospital itself was holding its breath. Keanu looked up, noticing the chaos, and sighed softly. "It's all right," he said to the director. "Really, I didn't want special treatment. I just wanted someone to care." His voice was gentle, but every word landed like a lesson. The doctor's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to apologize, her authority. None of it mattered. The man she'd called poor was wealthier than she could ever imagine, not just in fame, but in grace. The doctor watched him walk past her, her reflection trembling in the glass doors he disappeared through. For the first time in her career, she felt truly small, not because she'd met a celebrity, but because she'd forgotten her humanity. The room was silent, except for the steady hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beeping of heart monitors. The air hung heavy, not with chaos anymore, but with shame. Every eye was on Keanu Reeves as he stood slowly from the waiting chair. His movements were calm, deliberate, the quiet dignity in them somehow louder than any outburst could have been. The doctor stood a few steps away, her face pale, her hands trembling around the clipboard she'd retrieved from the floor. She couldn't meet his eyes. A moment ago, she had spoken to him with authority, with cold impatience. Now she could barely speak at all. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't know—" she began, her voice shaking. Keanu raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "It's okay," he said softly. "You were just doing your job." The simplicity of his words made the doctor's chest tighten. There was no bitterness in his tone, no hint of sarcasm or pride. Just calm understanding, the kind that only comes from a man who's known pain and learned to forgive it. "But she tried again, desperate to explain, to undo what she had said. He shook his head lightly. "You don't need to know someone's name to show kindness," he said quietly. The words seemed to echo through the entire ward. Every nurse, every orderly, even the director fell still. The young nurse who had recognized him earlier wiped at her eyes, unable to stop the tear that slid down her cheek. The doctor swallowed hard. Her throat burned with guilt. "You're right," she whispered. "I forgot that." Keanu's expression softened. "We all forget sometimes," he said. "Hospitals are hard places. People come here afraid, desperate. I get it. But every person who walks through those doors deserves to be seen as human first, not judged by what they look like." He paused, glancing at the corridor leading to the emergency room where his wife was being treated. His voice grew even softer. "Because sometimes it's the ones who look the most ordinary who carry the heaviest stories." The doctor's eyes glistened. She lowered her gaze, shame flooding her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Keanu offered a small smile, faint but genuine. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "Now please, go help her. That's all that matters." For a moment, no one moved. The hospital director looked at Keanu as though he were witnessing something rare, a grace too pure for the world of flashing lights and breaking news headlines. As Keanu sat back down, the nurse turned away, pretending to check her chart as she brushed away another tear. The doctor stood motionless, her chest rising and falling with deep, uneven breaths. Kindness. The word repeated itself in her mind like a quiet echo. She'd spent years studying medicine, learning to heal bodies, but tonight she realized how easily words could wound souls. And it took a man the world called a movie star to remind her what true humanity looked like. The night slowly faded into dawn. The pale glow of morning crept through the blinds, softening the harsh white light of the hospital room. Machines beeped steadily, their rhythm calm now, steady, reassuring. Keanu sat beside his wife's bed, her hand warm in his. The color had returned to her cheeks, and her breathing was even once more. After hours of fear and silence, she stirred, her eyelids fluttering open like fragile wings. "Hey," she whispered weakly, her voice soft but alive. Keanu's eyes filled with relief. He smiled, that quiet, gentle smile that had comforted millions on screen, but now carried the weight of something far more personal. "You're okay," he said softly, squeezing her hand. "You scared me for a bit." She tried to speak again, but he shushed her kindly. "Don't talk, just rest." For the first time that night, peace settled over him. The storm of fear and humiliation had passed. The only sound now was the quiet hum of the hospital, the breathing of life returning. Outside the glass window of the room, the doctor stood silently in the hallway, her eyes red from tears. She had been watching them for a few minutes, too afraid to step in, yet too moved to walk away. The memory of her own words haunted her. Poor man. How easily they had escaped her mouth, and how deeply they had cut her own conscience. Finally, she took a breath and knocked softly on the door. Keanu turned. For a moment, she couldn't meet his eyes. I'm sorry," she whispered, voice trembling, "for everything I said, for how I treated you. It was wrong." Keanu studied her quietly, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he stood up, his posture calm, his tone gentle. "It's all right," he said. "You've already made things right." The doctor blinked, confused. "How?" He smiled faintly. "By realizing it." He glanced at his wife, who was resting peacefully, then back at the doctor. His voice softened even further. "Just remember, every person who walks in here carries a story you can't see. Sometimes they're just too tired to tell it." Her lips quivered as she nodded. "I will," she said. "I promise." Keanu gave a small nod of understanding, then returned to his seat beside his wife, holding her hand once more. The doctor stood there for another moment, watching the quiet scene, the love, the grace, the before stepping back into the hallway. When the morning shift began, she gathered her team. The fatigue in her face was replaced by a quiet determination. Holding her clipboard like a vow, she spoke clearly. "From today," she said, We treat every patient like they're the most important person in the world, no matter who they are, what they wear, or what they can pay." The staff exchanged glances, surprised at the sudden conviction in her voice, but something in her tone made them listen. Because once she had learned that lesson, not from a lecture or a textbook, but from a man the world admired, and whom she had once mistaken for poor.